Thinking this week about what I wanted to share, and I began to think a little bit about how Jesus would share his messages. And when you read in the Bible, a lot of times when Jesus would speak to those that were following him, a lot of times he did something that was kind of unique. Well, I mean, during that day, it was actually quite normal, but we don't often do in our churches, and that is he would use storytelling to make a point. And a lot of times sharing stories is a way for us to connect with others because we're able to identify with parts of their stories that connect with our own lives. And in that way, it's almost as if the message that Jesus was trying to get across, people almost automatically got. Because he would share something that they identified with and then make the spiritual connection. And so this morning, I'm going to be sharing a story with you, but I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently. I'm going to need you to use your imagination this morning. Okay, because I'm going to be speaking sort of out of my own character, if you will. All right, I'm going to tell you the story this morning from the point of view of the actual Bible character. And so I would encourage you this morning to use your imagination and just pretend that I'm not Pastor Cameron for a minute. Can you do that? Okay, and as I share this morning, I would just encourage you just to listen to the story. And as I'm sharing, I would just allow you to see the obvious spiritual parallels that are there. Because throughout this story, there are things that take place and there are elements. If you would like to, you can turn in your Bible to 2 Kings chapter 5. That's where the story's found. I'm not going to be reading the scripture, but if you want to check up on me and make sure that I'm accurate, you're more than welcome to do that. I have taken the liberty this morning, I'll just let you know, of filling in some details that aren't in the text. And I want you to know ahead of time that I've done that for the sake of bringing the story alive, but I've not changed the essence of the story. Okay? Is everybody on the same page this morning? Okay. Well, 2 Kings chapter 5, it's a story of a guy named Naaman. But before we get into that, I'm going to pray. And then, again, I'd encourage you just to use your imagination this morning because Naaman's going to come and speak to you. Okay? All right, let's pray this morning. Lord, we thank you today, God, just for your faithfulness in our lives. And, Lord, and in speaking to us through your word. And so, God, this morning as we... Lord, as we hear the story of Naaman, Lord, I pray that you would open our hearts to receive, and God, that we would identify with the ways in which our lives are so very similar. And God, the ways in which you want to speak to us and to move in our lives as well. And so, God, we just open ourselves up to your Spirit. We say, God, come and speak to us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, good morning. My name is Naaman. I'm sure everybody here has heard of me before because I'm obviously one of the most famous characters in this book that you call the Bible. I didn't see a lot of excitement on that. Do I need to say this again? My name is Naaman. Hello? You all should feel privileged to be in my presence this morning. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea? Some people maybe have some idea, but for those that don't, let me share my story with you. Like I said, my name is Naaman, and I come from a small country called Syria. Now, this country was close to the ancient nation of Israel, which you may have heard of in your Bibles. But this country called Syria was a powerful nation in my day. You know why? Because I was the commander of the army. I am Naaman. I was like the top general in my day. In case you didn't know, I mean, nowadays people have these celebrities like, you know, sports heroes and actors. Well, I was the one back in my day that we would go out to battle and we would come back. All the kids would line the streets and they would look at me coming through with my victory parade and they would say, wow, I want to be like Naaman. Because I was that awesome. This general, this commander of the army of Syria. You know, even as a young man, I knew that I was destined to be a man of war. And I would practice when I was a kid. I would practice using my sword and my spear and riding the chariots. And I became very good at what I did. And eventually I rose through the ranks. I joined the army as a young man, and I rose through the ranks because people recognized my brilliance, my military genius, and my ability to strategize. And eventually I became the commander of the army of Syria. And in all of Syria, only the king was really more powerful than me. I had such a position of influence and so much power that whenever I wanted something done, I basically just had to say, this is what I want, and somebody would do it for me. Because I was this powerful, because I was this great. Commander of the army of Syria. You know, one of the cool things about being a commander of an army is you get pretty rich. And I was so rich So incredibly wealthy because I would go out oftentimes with my group of soldiers, and we would go and raid different places, including the Israelites. We hated the Israelites. Oh, we were bitter enemies. But we would go out and we would raid these people, and we would take their belongings. We'd take their gold and their silver and their horses and their sheep and their cattle. We would take all this. We'd take it for ourselves, and of course, if I had too much, I'd sell it, and then I would get whatever else I wanted. So I was incredibly wealthy, living the life, had everything that I could ever want. Worked my way through the ranks, became a general. We had some great battles, and I won a lot of them because I'm incredible. Powerful, rich, have it all, man of influence. There's nothing in my life, as I look back, there was nothing in my life that I could say I thought I was missing. I had a family that I loved, had all the wealth that I could desire, influence, only the king was greater. But then there was a moment when everything changed. There was a moment when things began to become different. Well, let me start with this. It's like I mentioned, I had everything that a man could ever ask for. A family, I had money, I had power, I had influence. But I remember late one evening, I came back from raiding an Israelite camp, and we had just come and plundered them and had wiped out a lot of their soldiers, and we came back, and I remember being very excited, very happy about the things that had taken place. And I began to notice that somewhere on my arm there was a little, almost looked like something of a boil that started to show up. And I at first tried to kind of rub it off. I tried to wash it with water and clean it, and it just didn't seem like it would go away. So I figured, it's just a little sore, no big deal. Waited a couple of days. Nothing got any better. In fact, it started to get a little bit worse. And I began to kind of get a little bit nervous. Began to think, what is this that's on my arm? What is going on here? And as time went on, days and weeks would go by, it would get worse, and then there would be another spot on my skin, and then another. And I began to just have all these questions raced through my mind about what was going on with me. Because I thought, I'm Naaman. I'm the commander of the army of Syria. I have everything that I could ever want in life. So how could it be that I've got some sort of skin disease that I can't get rid of? And I'd heard about this disease called leprosy. But when I thought about lepers, I thought about poor people who lived in isolated villages that nobody wanted to talk to. I thought about people who were outcasts, people who didn't take care of themselves. And I thought there's no way that that could happen to me. I live in a nice home. I take care of myself. I'm the commander of the army of Syria. But I had to be sure. So I went to the king's doctor and I asked him to examine me. And as he looked at me, he looked at my skin, and I will never forget the look on his face as he immediately diagnosed what was going on. And he looked at me and he just said, "Naaman, you have leprosy." And I just stood there speechless for a moment because I thought, this is impossible. How did I get leprosy? Here I am, the commander of the army of Syria. I live in a nice home, have a nice family. I haven't been hanging out in leper colonies. How did this happen to me? How did I get leprosy? And what am I supposed to do now? Because you have to understand that back in my day, there was no cure for leprosy. This was a disease that would take over your body. It would start with these sores on the skin, and it would begin to affect your eyes and your limbs and your nervous system. And it would get to a point sometimes that people would lose fingers and toes. But the worst part about leprosy was not the fact that it would affect you physically, but the fact that you would look at the people who were lepers, and because they were contagious, people wanted nothing to do with them. And they would have their own separate villages and their own separate camps away from everybody. And it was complete isolation from normal society. And you have to remember, here I am as the commander of Syria. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going to happen? Right now, I'm invited to all the parties. I can walk right into the king's palace and have a conversation with him. Everybody knows me, everybody loves me, and here all of a sudden this thing comes into my life, and it has the potential to isolate me from my family, from my friends, from my position of influence, and from everything that I've known. It can all be gone. And there's no answer. There's no doctor that has a cure. I begged the doctor. I asked him. I told him I would give him whatever he wanted, that I would pay him any price in order to be rid of this leprosy. But it didn't matter because there was no cure. I remember I went home and I was just absolutely depressed. And I sat down with my wife and I talked to her and I told her what was going on, and she cried for hours. I sat alone late that night, unable to sleep and completely depressed, because I knew that everything that I had worked for was now going to go to waste. None of it mattered anymore. All my wealth, all my success just seemed totally pointless. And while I was sitting outside alone, just in total despair, one of my servant girls came up to me. She was an Israelite. She was one of these girls that on one of our raids, we had taken some of the kids that were left after their parents were killed, and we took them as our servants. She was one of these that we had taken from the Israelites, our bitter enemies. And she came up to me. She asked me why I was crying. So I told her that I had leprosy, that I had this incurable disease, and that there was nothing that could be done. And just very peacefully, she said to me, "Master, don't be sad. There's a prophet, a man of God in Israel that I know could help you." And my first thought was, what does this little girl know? She thinks that there's somebody who can cure leprosy. Does she not understand? No, this is an incurable disease. And then my second thought was, why would she share this with me? We killed her parents and took her to be our servant. And here she is trying to help me? I didn't understand it at all. But I listened to what she said, and I began to think about it. I finally went to sleep that night, and as I slept, I tossed and turned, and I thought so much about, I wonder if there really is somebody that could cure me of my leprosy. I wonder if there really is hope. I wonder if there really is an answer for this. And part of me thought, maybe this is just some sort of stab in the dark, but if there is anything to what this girl has to say, I mean, the tone in her voice just made it sound like she believed what she was telling me. I debated all that night. Even if there is hope, how could I stoop so low as to go to my enemies, the people that I've invaded, that I've conquered, that I've raided, and ask them for help? And then if they can't help me, how embarrassing is that? I would be socially humiliated for the rest of my life. Finally, as I woke up in the morning, I came to a decision. I had to. I said, if there's even the slightest hope that maybe this might work, I have to try. I have to try. So I went to the king and I talked to him and I asked for his permission. I told him what was going on and talked to him about the leprosy. And I told him that maybe there was somebody in Israel that could cure me. Well, the king and I were on good terms, so he was glad to help me out. He was a little confused by why I would want to go to my enemies for help. But at the same time, he said he would give me all of his support. And so he wrote a letter for me that I could give to the king of Israel so that I would have his full backing for this. He was more than happy to do anything to get me cured. So I took this letter and, I decided, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to head to Israel and I'm going to see if I can figure out what's going on. I packed my things and I gathered as much silver and gold as I could carry. I brought some of my finest clothing and I set it all together, and I gathered a group of my men together because we were going to take off, and I figured I better be ready to pay a lot. Because I thought in my mind it must be expensive to pay for a cure to an incurable disease. This must be some well-kept secret that somehow is going to cost a lot of money, but I thought if anybody can afford it, if anybody can make it happen, it's going to be me, commander of the army of Syria. So I gathered all my things together, packed it all together, brought some of my best men with me, and we rode out for Israel. And I remember as we came into Israel, as we crossed the border and we began to come closer towards the capital city, I just remember people looking at us and recognizing who we were. And I remember getting very nervous because here I was in a country that I had raided several times, our bitter enemies. And they looked at me and they recognized, this is Naaman. We hate Naaman. And I kept wondering when somebody was going to jump out of the trees and attack us, or when somebody was going to rob us whenever we stopped our group and sat down for rest. I kept thinking something's going to happen because here we are in hostile territory. These people hate us. Or they're going to think that we've come to do something to them, that we're here for another raid, that they'd be upset with us. And the looks that people gave us were not good. Didn't feel welcome at all. But I came into Israel, and despite all the looks of the people, we came to the capital. We came up to the king's palace. I took the letter and I gave it to one of the guards, and they went in to deliver it to the king. And I remember as they went to deliver it to the king, I wasn't able to go into the king's chambers, but I could hear from outside the walls of the city. When he opened the letter, you could hear him get mad. You could hear him yelling at the top of his lungs, and it sounded like he was tearing his clothes. He was clearly upset, yelling things like, "Who does this guy think he is? He can just come to me and ask for a cure for leprosy? He knows that's impossible. He's trying to pick a fight. That's what he's doing. He's looking for an excuse to make war on us." And I could hear him yelling these things, and I thought in my mind, this was a mistake. Why did I come here? What am I doing? I should have never come here. So I left the palace, and again, I was depressed. Because here I thought, maybe there's this little bit of hope. If I ask the king, maybe he can send me to this man who has this cure. Maybe I can find him. But if the king himself was unwilling to help me, if the king himself didn't know anything about some sort of cure for an incurable disease, then I thought maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe there is no answers. Maybe there is no hope. So I sat down with my men and we made camp outside the city. We were getting ready to leave. I honestly was about to give up. Was going to pack my things and just say, you know what, we're not going to find this guy, and if he's even out there, he probably doesn't really have a cure. And I was all ready to give up. I was ready to quit when a servant boy came out to us at our camp. He said he came from the king's palace and he had a message for me. Said that there was a prophet named Elisha who supposedly had this cure for my leprosy. And so I thought to myself, well, at least I got the name of the guy. I mean, maybe I could check it out. Maybe I could at least, before I leave, maybe I could at least go by and see if there's something to this. So I gathered my men together. We decided, hey, we're going to go over there. We're going to see if there's anything to this, if there's anything real, if there's any kind of hope. Sounds like it could be a trap. That was another thought that I had. I said, if the king sends this servant to me to tell me to go to this place to see a prophet, what if he's trying to set me up for an ambush? What if he's sending me here so that I go there and my men are surrounded and he takes us out? You have to remember, Israel was our bitter enemies. And I couldn't imagine why he would even want to help us. But again, I thought if there's any hope at all, I have to try. So we set out for the place that the servant had told us, and we began to take our convoy that direction. And as we came through the hills, we came to this place, and you could see what looked like just a tiny little house just on the side of the hills. And as I looked at it, I thought to myself, this is not a good sign. Because if this man really is a prophet, then surely he will be more well-respected, more honored, than to be living in this tiny little house like he's never had a successful prophecy in his life. Surely, I mean, when he has done things for people, they've paid him decently. And if not, he must not be a very good prophet. If he can heal people of incurable diseases, he must be rich. But this is not a good sign. So I see this tiny little house, and as we're riding up to it, I see a younger man come out of the house. And then I think to myself, this prophet sure is young. I hope he knows what he's doing. But the man introduced himself, and I said, "Are you Elisha?" He said, "No, my name's Gehazi." I thought, oh, okay. Well, so maybe I'm at the wrong place. He says, No. Elisha sent me out. He told me to give you this message. You're supposed to go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and you'll be cured. Now, you might think that in that moment I took his advice and said, okay, I'm going to go do it. But do you realize how ridiculous that sounded? I come all this way from the enemies of Israel. I come all this way out into the hillside, go through all this trouble to find this man. First of all, he doesn't come out to even see me himself. I'm not a big fan of talking to people who send a messenger for them. They can't even look me in the eye themselves. Sounds like a fake prophet to me. Sounds like somebody, he won't even look me in the eye. He sends his younger helper to come out and tell me to go wash myself? To go take a bath? Like the thought hadn't crossed my mind before. So I'm thinking to myself, he wants me to wash 7 times. And in the Jordan River, I don't know, how many of you have seen the Jordan River? It's disgusting. I mean, we're not talking clear waters, beautiful, picturesque kind of thing. I mean, no, this is disgusting. The water is all brown. It's muddy. It's gross. It's dirty. And I thought, if I've got this disease on my skin, the last thing I want to do is go wash myself in nasty water. I'm thinking, this just does not make sense. If this guy's a prophet, why wouldn't he just come out to me and be like, hey, you're healed? I thought, he's a fake. He's a phony. He tells me to go wash myself. If he really had the cure, he'd have came out and cured me. Why go through all this trouble? Doesn't make any sense at all. If a bath would have cured me, I would have already done that. There were rivers in Syria. It's not like I couldn't have gone and washed myself in those. I was furious. I just snapped to my men. I said, hey, we're leaving. We're getting out of here. This is ridiculous. And I thought about burning down his house before I left. I was mad to come all this way to have my hope build up and then for him to say, go wash yourself. And as I was all ready to leave, practically on my way out of the country, just ready to take off, one of my men had the courage to speak up to me, and he just said, Naaman, you came all this way. You put in all this effort, and you were willing to pay any price to be cured of your leprosy. Don't you think it's at least worth a try to just do what he says? And it just sounded so ridiculous. I thought, surely this is an incurable disease. It can't be as simple as washing in the river. Someone would have already figured this out. But I did come all this way. And I did bring all this money, so I guess I might as well at least try. It can't hurt. So I went with my men. We went down to the Jordan River. And as we came up to it, it stunk. It looked terrible, looked disgusting. I was not excited to go in and to wash myself. But I came down to the edge of the river, and as I started to wade in, it was a little chilly. And I thought, okay, well, here goes nothing. Walk out in the middle of the river. I dipped myself down under, and I came back up, and I looked at my skin, and if anything, it was just more muddy. Looked as bad as it did before. I thought, I knew it. Somehow, something in me thought maybe this was a magical river, but I knew it. Nothing. But the prophet did say to dip myself 7 times. So I thought maybe this is a progressive thing. And it'll, the more times I dip, the more it'll cleanse it. So I went down a 2nd time, came back up, nothing. 3rd time, nothing. 4th time, nothing. After 6 times, I'd gone down and back up, and I thought, you know what, I'm just starting to look like a mud man. I mean, it's just, my skin's still gross, I'm just getting dirtier, it's not getting any better. But he did say 7 times. So I went back down under the 7th time, and when I came up out of the water, my skin was as clean as if I was a young boy. It was a miracle. I couldn't explain it. There was nothing that made sense in my mind to explain how this had happened, because the 6th time I went under, my skin was as nasty as it had been before. And one more time, and all of a sudden just miraculously cured. And that's when it began to dawn on me that this had nothing to do with the river. This had nothing to do with me. This had nothing to do with some sort of magical cure, but that this God that Elisha the prophet served was real. And not only was he real, but he was incredibly powerful. See, coming from Syria, I had worshipped and served several different gods, but I had always thought that these gods were sort of limited in their power, or maybe even sort of just superstitious creations to keep people in line. But when I saw my skin cleared up, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was no superstitious thing. This was no make-believe, phony religious thing. This was real. This was the power of God at work. And I knew what I had to do. So I came out of the water and I was excited. I was running and jumping and I was just about tackling my men, and so excited because of what had happened, because my skin was clean. And I said, we've got to go back and we've got to see Elisha right now. So we got in our chariots and we took off just as fast as we could. We came back to that little house in the hills. And before we even got there, you could see him coming out of the house. He knew we were coming. He knew that we were coming back. And I saw him and I said, are you Elisha? And he said, yes. And I told him my story. I told him about how what he had said, it worked, and I washed and I was cleansed and I was talking 1,000,000 miles an hour because I was so excited and I couldn't believe what had happened. It was miraculous. I had went from having no hope to being completely restored. And I said, you know what, Elisha, I get it now. I believe that there is a God who is real and who's powerful, and I want to serve him. I want to live for him. And Elisha was excited with me about this. He was so excited. He didn't have to preach anything to me. He didn't have to say anything to convince me to serve God. I just knew because I'd seen the power of God with my own eyes. And I was so grateful. I said, look, Elisha, I brought all this silver and gold, and I want you to have it because it's worth it for me to be healthy, for me to be cured. I want you to have it all. And he said to me, no, I'm not taking it. And I thought to myself, no, wait a minute here. What you've done for me is something incredible, and I don't feel like I can ever repay you. You've got to take something. And he said, no. This is God's work. I'm not in this for the money. I'm just sharing with you what God told me. I was surprised, but I said, okay. And I took off. You know, later this Gehazi, this younger man, came after me, and he actually did ask me for something, which I found out later he wasn't supposed to do, but that's a whole different story. But I got to tell you, I was amazed by Elisha's actions. I was amazed that he didn't want any money for it, that he was doing it somehow because he actually cared about me, even though he was an Israelite and I was from Syria. We were bitter enemies. You know, the thing is, had it not been for this whole disease, had it not been for me getting leprosy, I would never would have realized who God was. I would have never began to ask the questions that led me to understand that. I would have never taken this journey that helped me to see that I really needed God. And I feel bad for all of the people who have lived perfect lives and never had that moment where they recognized that they needed God. Because the truth is, whether we have leprosy or not, whether we have it all together or not, whether we have influence and wealth or not, we all desperately need God. And there are none of us who can say that our lives are perfect or complete without him. And sometimes it's the moments, it's the things in life that seem like the worst disaster, that take away all hope. Sometimes those are the things that bring us to our knees and help us to realize that there is no price that we can pay. There is no thing that we can accomplish. There is no amount of actions that we can do that will ever earn us that hope. Nothing we can ever do or say or pay that will ever give us that answer to what we need. But it's when we recognize that we desperately need God and we simply say, Lord, I surrender to you and I'm willing to obey what you ask me to do. My healing was not because I did something special. I took a bath in the river. It was not because of anything I did, but it was because I was willing to do the thing that I was asked to do, that I was willing to obey God. I want to transition back to being Pastor Cameron for a moment. You know, as I think about our own culture, as I think about America, I see all the time examples of people who, in one way, they're a lot like Naaman. On the outside, it would appear that they have things together. They have wealth, they have influence, they have a good family. And some of those people have this moment in life where there's a crisis that drives them to their knees and they recognize that they need God, but there are so many others who never come to that realization that while they seem to have it all together, there is something that's missing. And there's something inside of each of us. There's a disease. It's not leprosy. It's called sin. And just like leprosy, it's incurable on our own. There's nothing we can do to scrub it out of our lives. There's nothing we can do to sort of take it and just make it disappear. There's nothing we can do to undo the consequences of it. There's no price we can pay. Nothing that we can do in our own efforts that will ever make it go away. And yet it's when we come to God and we recognize our desperate need and we say, God, I need you to take this away. That's when he does it. And I see so many people in our American culture who are this way. That they just haven't come to just being able to recognize that there is this desperate need in our lives. And this morning, hopefully you've been able to identify with somebody in this story because ultimately all of us find ourselves sort of fitting in with one of these characters. Maybe it's Naaman. Maybe in your own life you've felt that void, or there's been something that's come into your life. Maybe it is sin. Maybe it is a disease like Naaman had. Maybe it's a family issue. Maybe it's an issue with your job, but there's something that no matter what you pay, no matter what effort you give, there's an issue that's bigger than you, that you can't tackle it on your own. You don't have the answers. And you're trying, but you can't seem to make it work. And you would do anything to fix that issue, but just can't seem to make it happen. And this morning, maybe it is that you just need to recognize, as Naaman did, that the only answer is to seek God. And being desperate for God is the best position that you can be in. If I could have someone return to the piano this morning. It might be that you feel like Naaman this morning, but it could also be that you've found God in your life and you've sought him and you've learned to make this a part of your life and seeking him and recognizing your need even when you don't feel it. And yet you know that there are people around you who are like Naaman. That there are people in your life who haven't recognized this need that they have, or perhaps they have, but they don't know where the answer is. And it could be that in your life you can fill that role that the servant girl did. You know, in this story, she plays such a small part. She just tells him there's this guy that can help you. That's all she does. She doesn't have a name in the story. She's not anybody special. She's a servant girl whose parents were probably killed and she was taken captive, and now she's serving in this guy's home. She's nobody special at all. But she knows the truth. She knows where hope can be found. And so when she sees somebody that has that need, and she sees somebody that has this hopelessness and can't find the answers, all she does is simply say, that direction. I know somebody who can help you. And this morning, maybe you identify more with Naaman, more with the servant girl. It really doesn't matter, because all of us are in one of those pairs of shoes. And my prayer this morning is that if you're like Naaman, I hope that this morning, this message, this story has resonated with you so that you have come to a point where you're saying, you know what, I really do need God. Because that's the best place to be. It feels it's a difficult thing to feel like you're not in control. To feel like there is nothing I can do. To admit that. To say, I can't fix this problem on my own. This issue is bigger than me. But it's a place we need to get to so that we can say, God, it's your turn to take over. This morning, if I could have some of our prayer leaders, if they could just come to the front. And I just want to close this way this morning. If you could just close your eyes for a minute and just allow the Lord to speak to you. I know that we're all at different points in our spiritual journey this morning and at different levels of spiritual maturity, but this morning I just want to offer to you simply. You may have been serving the Lord for 50 years, but this morning, if you feel in some way like Naaman this morning, that there is just something in your life, there's an issue, there's a burden that's too big for you. I just want to invite you to come this morning and to say, God, it's too big for me. I need you. Because there's no greater thing that we can do than to recognize, God, I need you, and to seek his face. So this morning, if there is any need in your life that you just feel it's too big for me, this issue is more than I can handle, I want to encourage you this morning. Whether you don't know the Lord, you've been serving him for 50 years, you're welcome to come this morning to seek the Lord, to say, God, I surrender. I'm ready to do whatever you ask. Come this morning and allow us to pray for you.